Hello everyone, tonight we were going to a city that didn't even have a name yet, a place full of goats, rocky hills, and very ambitious gods. It's hot, it smells like roasted barley and sweaty linen, and it's about to become the backdrop for one of the pettiest mythological contests in history. But because the gods literally used your city as a chessboard for their cosmic ego battles. And as a mortal, your opinion didn't really matter. You were just trying not to get cursed. Two immortals walk into a city with gifts in hand, and they're both fully convinced they'll win the people's hearts. Spoiler alert, one offers salt water, the other offers olives, and nobody's quite sure who got the better deal. You probably want to survive a week in early Athens, not because of the climate or the constant threat of war. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. If you've ever tried cooking with seawater, you know how quickly that gets old. But olives? You can press them, eat them, burn the oil in lamps. They don't scream divine power, but they're handy. And post your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you tuning in from. No, he holds a grudge like a Greek god holds a storm cloud just waiting. According to legend, Poseidon floods the countryside a little later, wrecking crops and soaking homes like a divine toddler throwing a tantrum. You can almost hear their internal monologue. We are going to make one of these immortals very angry, aren't we? The people of the city didn't ask for it. Was the contest decided by all the men and women of the city? Was it just the gods? Did Poseidon make a horse, not a spring? There's even an alternate myth where Poseidon wins, and the city is named Poseidonia, but it doesn't catch on. Too hard to spell on Amphory. It was the gods who needed attention, validation, and apparently a new neighborhood to fight over. Well, welcome to Athens, where practicality beats spectacle. Where intelligence grudgingly wins over flair. And where your patron goddess might lecture you before she blesses you. You've got olives, an angry sea god, and a new civic identity. You try not to think too hard about whether choosing Athena was the right move. After all, how bad could Poseidon's revenge be? Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Somewhere nearby, a merchant is wondering how to export olive oil without spilling it. And under the shade of the new tree, a sleepy goat sniffs the bark and wonders why this plant smells a little too divine. It begins in a city that doesn't have a name yet, just a rocky acropolis overlooking the Aegean Sea where goats bleat. Markets smell like garlic because the moment that people favor Athena, Poseidon gets that look. You know, the one when someone loses a board game and pretends they refine, but you can see their brain plotting arson. That look. And unwashed tunics, and everyone's nervous because two gods have just arrived with very big expectations. One brave local dips a toe into the water and spits. Either way, the message is clear. Don't make gods compete for your affection unless you recool with eternal consequences. It's salty. Not just salty, it's sea brand salty, like gargling anchovies. Nobody knows what to say. Ancient writers claim it still stood on the Acropolis hundreds of years later, even after Persians, plagues, and tourists with sticky fingers. They say it was replanted from a sprig after being burned. Like a divine version of a houseplant, it just kept coming back. The olive becomes not just a food source, but a political symbol. You'll see it stamped onto coins, baked into bread, and rubbed into the hair of athletes who really should have been bathing more often. One is Poseidon, all muscles, trident, and stormy hair. She kneels quietly and presses her fingers into the earth. A tree grows slow at first, then suddenly full and silver green. It's an olive tree, and when the wind blows, the leaves shimmer like coins. She doesn't say anything. She just looks at the people and raises one eyebrow. He stamps his foot on the rock and a spring bursts from the ground. "Ta-da!" says Poseidon, grinning. The crowd steps forward, curious. Then comes Athena. No thunder, no splash, no performance. You're standing there, watching, trying to decide. One gift is flashy but useless inland. The other might be kind of practical. The city's elders look at each other. Still, they choose. Slowly, quietly, they go with Athena. This is where the story is supposed to end, but it doesn't. He doesn't destroy the city. Not right away. That would be too obvious. Historians still debate whether the myth reflects real ancient floods or just a symbolic explanation for why Athens had to build so many cisterns. Back to the olive tree. It survives. In fact, it thrives. And yet, nobody in the myth actually wanted this contest in the first place. The funny thing? There are dozens of versions of this myth, and almost none of them agree on the details. You might be thinking, what kind of city names itself after a goddess who doesn't throw parties, hates drama, and judges your weaving skills? So here you are in a newborn city blessed by a tree and cursed by salt water. You'll find out soon enough. But for now, someone's setting up the foundations of a temple using olive wood beams. Somewhere nearby, a merchant is wondering how to export olive oil without spilling it. And under the shade of the new tree, a sleepy goat sniffs the bark and wonders why this plant smells a little too divine. Poseidon was not known for handling rejection well. And unfortunately, Athens had just ghosted him in public. You'd think a god with his own underwater palace would let it go. Maybe go churn some whirlpools or throw a trident at a dolphin, but no. Poseidon decided to make this personal. And he had a flair for dramatic consequences. Soon after Athena was declared the winner, the ground around Athens began acting moody. Wells dried up. Streams turned brackish. Then the flood came, not a mythical wall of water, but a petty, soggy inconvenience that Poseidon probably considered light mischief. Locals called it a divine flood, but historians still debate whether this story reflected a real seasonal overflow or just a way to explain marshy disaster zones with god-sized egos. You wake up to find your grain soaked, your goats knee-deep in mud, and your sandals ruined. Poseidon's first gift to the city, that spring on the Acropolis, never actually dried up, but it also never became useful. Others say it's just erosion and that we reel over thinking a crack in the floor. And the poor citizens of Athens were stuck in the middle. One myth claims Poseidon would send waves crashing against the port of Piraeus anytime a statue of Athena was neglected or someone insulted olives. Either way, tourists still take photos next to it, trying not to look disappointed. The water was still salty, and visitors who tasted it usually did so once, then spat dramatically and questioned their life choices. But in myth, when Poseidon got really mad, the ground shook. Buildings cracked, amphorae shattered. Pottery shops hated him. There's no warning system. Just a low rumble, followed by your neighbor shouting, "Not again," while chasing a runaway chicken. Some believed the spring was a portal to Poseidon's realm, like an ancient vending machine to nowhere. Historians still argue over whether certain collapses were due to tectonic activity or bad architecture and heavy partying. While Poseidon threw saltwater tantrums, Athena quietly turned the city into a fortress of learning, commerce, and snacking. He was powerful, and as a sea power, Athens still depended on him. Here's a nice stone bench and some figs. So they tried to appease both gods. One festival honored both Athena and Poseidon in alternating years, which sounds like the divine equivalent of joint custody. Poseidon's vibe never softened. He remained stormy and distant, only visiting the city in the form of bad weather and awkward silences during temple dedications. Did he think the people of a dry, rocky hilltop city would jump at the chance for a salty puddle? Did he believe his presence alone was enough? The one that fed them, lit their homes, and flavored their flatbreads. In doing so, they also chose a certain identity, practical, clever, a little dry. And that decision would shape not just the city, but philosophy, politics, and the entire Western concept of wisdom wrapped in a helmet, which makes sense. Poseidon was the sea god after all. His divine branding was on point. Unfortunately, so was his obliviousness. No one in their right mind would trade arable land for ocean runoff. But the city's heart, its real loyalty, belonged to the goddess who planted something that could grow. And think, what a nice, practical product. Remember, that's not just skincare. That's ancient divine politics in a bottle. Except maybe Spartans, but they were a different flavor of chaotic. Fishermen still prayed to him, of course. Sailors made offerings before every voyage, but on land? He was viewed like an ex who still shows up uninvited, floods your basement, and complains about your new olive-based diet. There's even an ancient stone hole still, visible on the Acropolis, that some archaeologists think was a symbolic remnant of Poseidon's trident strike. But let's talk about the gift itself. If Poseidon had offered a horse, as later myths claimed, that would have been impressive. But Athens was rocky, steep, and famously lacking in horse-friendly roads. A horse in ancient Athens was like giving a snowmobile to someone living on a beach. In the earliest versions, it's always the saltwater spring. Still, Poseidon was stubborn. In retaliation for losing the contest, he did what any jilted god might. He struck up a years-long feud with Athena, and then came the earthquakes. Yes, Poseidon wasn't just the god of the sea, but of earthquakes too. That part often gets forgotten like it's a side hustle. You imagine waking up in a rickety house made of timber and clay, only to feel the floor ripple like dough. And because ancient records blur fact with storytelling, we don't always know which events were real tremors and which were dramatic flourishes, but the damage to Poseidon's reputation was real. After losing the contest, he became that god important, yes, but not beloved. Athena, on the other hand, didn't gloat. That wasn't her style. She simply started building. Temples, walls, workshops, olive presses. Typical goddess of civilization things. Still, you couldn't completely ignore Poseidon. They also built a small shrine to Poseidon right next to the Parthenon like, hey man, no hard feelings. It didn't work. At some point, you start to wonder, what did Poseidon expect? Maybe he just assumed people would choose spectacle over substance, but Athens chose otherwise. They picked the less flashy gift. And Poseidon? He still got invited to festivals. He still got his sacrifices. So the next time you drizzle olive oil on a salad or rub it on your dry elbows. And Poseidon is somewhere in some mythological bar still salty about it. So there you are, freshly drenched from Poseidon's petty flood, scraping soggy barley off your sandals and wondering if Athena's olive tree was really worth all this trouble. It's not tall, it's not pretty, and when the wind blows, the leaves sound like whispers between old men. But Athena knew what she was doing. The rain has stopped, but the arguments haven't. You're standing under the very tree she planted, which now has a modest rope fence around it, probably to keep out curious goats and kids with slingshots. You wouldn't think something as ordinary looking as an olive tree could change a civilization. Temples would store it, contests would award it, and city festivals like the Panathenea would literally gift it by the gallant victors. Imagine winning a sports event and getting jars of oil instead of a trophy. Useful? Yes. Flashy? Not really. Try explaining that to your neighbor. Check it out, I came in first and now I can moisturize for life. This wasn't just a tree, it was an ancient Swiss Army knife. You get something you nurture, prune, and wait for. And then, eventually, you have enough to light your home during long winter nights or trade for a new pair of sandals that don't squeak. You could crush the olives for oil, eat them, and burn the oil in lamps. Zeus throws lightning bolts. Apollo brings sunlight and plague. Dionysus delivers wine and party anxiety. A culture built not on conquest or gold or massive statues, but on a humble tree with bitter fruit and oily promise. Terraces were carved into hillsides to make olive farming possible. New trade routes were charted, and suddenly, Athens wasn't just a rocky hill with some decent philosophers, it was an olive oil powerhouse. And hosting philosophical debates about the meaning of justice while possibly still smelling faintly like salad dressing. One Spartan reportedly quipped that Athenians spent more time grooming their beards and pressing their oil than sharpening their swords. Classic Sparta always ready with a burn and a spear. The bark is rough. The air smells faintly earthy and clean. Somewhere nearby, a vendor is hawking olive tapenade even though no one's invented the word tapenade yet. But Athena? She hands you a tree, walks away, and waits to see if you'll figure it out. On coins, pottery, freezes sometimes with an owl perched on a branch looking deeply judgmental. You could be halfway across the Greek world and see an Athenian coin with an olive branch on it. And yep, that's from the people who pick trees over tantrums. One where you don't need drama and spectacle to prove you matter. One where you grow, wait, and give back. Talk about bureaucracy branching out, that's okay. It's not meant to be eaten yet. It's meant to be transformed. People bathed in it, cooked with it, even offered it to the gods. Athenian athletes smeared it all over their glistening muscles before competitions, probably assuming it made them shinier and luckier. It didn't, but it looked cool. And the oil trade? That took off like wildfire. Soon, amphorae full of the stuff were bobbing their way across the Mediterranean. It wasn't just a crop, it was currency, diplomacy, and a status symbol. Either way, the link between Athena's gift and Athenian wealth is hard to miss. If your family owned an olive press, you weren't just a farmer, you were an up-and-coming civic influencer. What is wild is that people in ancient Athens started measuring property value in part by how many olive trees it had. There were actual laws about damaging someone else's trees. You didn't mess with another man's olive grove unless you wanted your name cursed, your sandals peed on by goats, and possibly a fine from the city magistrate. One weird but true fact: Athenians believed the original olive tree, the one planted by Athena herself, had a soul. They claimed that even when it was burned down during the Persian sack of Athens, it regrew almost immediately. A sprig of it was preserved and replanted, and people made pilgrimages just to look at it. That's right, early tourism. Come see the miraculous plant and maybe buy an overpriced fig on the way out. And while we're on the subject, olive oil wasn't just a cooking ingredient, it was a centerpiece of religious rituals. But Athena didn't just give you the tree. She gave you the idea that wisdom was slow-growing, like olives. You don't get instant satisfaction. Here's a little philosophical nugget you can chew on as you drift off. In most myths, gods give gifts that are flashy and immediate. And you did. The whole city did. The olive tree became so central to Athenian identity that it started showing up everywhere. Athena's tree also reshaped how people used their land. There is even evidence that the earliest property surveys in Athens were created to manage who owned which groves and how many trees were allowed per acre. Historians still debate whether the olive economy made Athens rich enough to build the Parthenon, or whether it just paid for all the free snacks at city debates. And there's something charming about it, too. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Rival cities, especially Sparta, mocked Athens for its effeminate obsession with olives and learning. But the Athenians didn't mind. They were too busy exporting oil, building temples, so here you are again, sitting under that tree, watching the light shift through the silver leaves. And in that moment, it hits you. This isn't just a myth about a gift, it's a blueprint for an entire worldview. You reach up, pluck an olive, and immediately regret it because it tastes like regret itself. Kind of like the city. Kind of like you. The moment the olive tree took root on the Acropolis, everything changed except for one thing: the gods were still terribly bad at accepting defeat, especially Poseidon. And unfortunately for everyone involved, wasn't he the kind of sore loser who just moped for a century and got over it? No, he was the kind who brought consequences. That brings us to one of the most politically awkward moments in mythical civic history, the vote that crowned Athena the patron deity of the city. You'd think such a big decision would come with rules, a campaign, maybe a temple bake-off. The women all voted for Athena. The men voted for Poseidon. And here's the kicker: there was one more woman than there were men. Athena won by a single vote. The people did. And in a radical early experiment in democracy, each citizen cast a vote. But no, the people of the city gathered, the gods presented their shiny gifts, and then it was time to vote. That's when things got even messier than usual for a pantheon that had already invented human sacrifice, flying horses, and Zeus's entire dating history. They also lost the right to pass down Athenian citizenship through the maternal line. That's right, divine pettiness turned into historical patriarchy, and women paid the price. Here's how it went. According to the oldest version of the tale, the gods didn't pick the winner. Citizens were reminded through olive branches, sacred rituals, and possibly every meal they ever ate that Athena was the rightful patron of the city. And Poseidon? He was there. Still stormy. Still kind of salty. Literally, kids grew up hearing how the city picked the smart goddess, how the olive tree fed the people, and how one vote could change everything. But either way, the story stuck, and it says a lot about how myths weren't just bedtime stories, but tools used to explain or excuse major shifts in society. And sheep sweat in the air, and a crowd of very nervous citizens trying to figure out how to choose without dying horribly. You cast your vote for Athena, whispering a quick apology to Poseidon. And then, as the results are counted, you brace for impact. This was still a society that kept slaves, excluded most of its population from politics, and treated philosophy like a competitive sport. But even so, the myth of the vote carried weight. It reminded people that gods were watching, choices mattered, and sometimes the best decision was the one that didn't. Tea come with a splashy entrance and a salty aftertaste. Earthquakes, floods, and some very localized crop failures were involved. Probably because it reflected their identity, choosing wisdom over power, the olive over the sea, reason over chaos, and one that could change your weather patterns for centuries. Even if that vote sparked divine fury and some terrible election reforms, it was still their choice. A temple was built to both deities on the Acropolis. Athena got the Parthenon, of course, and Poseidon got a shrine right next door. You can still visit the spot today, complete with a little spring. Later Roman writers, always eager to clean up Greek mythology's rough edges, started leaving out the awkward voting bit. To them, it seemed odd that a city would choose its god rather than be assigned one like divine homework. The Romans preferred the version where Athena just naturally becomes the patroness, none of that messy democracy stuff. Thank you. And a reminder that even in mythology, politics is mostly about compromise, disappointment, and very fancy architecture. The details vary, but one thing remains the same: the city paid a price. Sounds fair, right? Except it wasn't, because back then, citizen didn't mean everyone. It meant adult male with property who wasn't a foreigner or enslaved. But even within that very narrow bracket, there were divisions. In the most deliciously petty version of the myth, the vote was split along gender lines. Cue dramatic lightning crack, trident shaking, and at least 3 gods in the background pretending to care while sneakily sipping fermented honey wine. Poseidon, absolutely not having it, unleashed a storm of divine rage, and here's where things get awkward. The men of Athens, embarrassed that the whole city was now cursed over a one-vote gender imbalance, made a ... decision. They stripped Athenian women of their voting rights. Yup, according to legend, women were banned from participating in politics as punishment for tipping the scales in favor of Athena. Historians still debate whether this myth reflects real ancient policy changes or was invented later as a fable to justify why women weren't involved in political life. Now back to the gods. After the whole debacle, Poseidon cooled down enough to allow a kind of spiritual detente. Meanwhile, the vote continued to echo through history. The story became a civic legend told at festivals and etched onto the cultural DNA of Athens. What's fascinating is how this myth gets reinterpreted over time. But in Athens, they kept the story. And remember, this wasn't just myth, this was used to teach civic values. Now, before you start imagining these ancient Athenians as perfect enlightened thinkers, let's not forget the context. So, picture it: a rocky hilltop, sun beating down, 2 gods waiting. The smell of baked bread, because picking your city's patron deity? It's not just a question of myth, it's a permanent lifestyle decision. And one that could change your weather patterns for centuries. Let's take a moment and talk about your new landlord, Athena, the goddess you chose. The deity who now watches over your city with the same energy as a substitute teacher who takes attendance like it's a sacred duty. Because frankly, Athena was a lot. If you were expecting warmth, motherly affection, or parties with wine and dancing, you've chosen the wrong Olympian. Athena didn't host orgies like Dionysus or flirt with mortals like Aphrodite. She didn't even throw lightning bolts like her dad. Athena had no time for vanity, no interest in love affairs, and absolutely zero tolerance for foolishness. Her whole vibe: strategic competence, intellectual precision. She was the goddess who read the instructions before assembling the ballista. Thank you very much. She just stood there, helmet on, shield raised, eyes sharp, and judged everyone. She didn't bluster. She just appeared fully armed and let her posture do the talking. If she were around today, she'd be that coworker who walks into meetings with a clipboard and a calm, terrifying smile while everyone else tries to remember where they left their pants. This was a place built not on brute strength but on clever designed tight streets, disciplined law courts, clever naval plans, and philosophical debates so long they had intermissions. Athena didn't just represent intelligence. She represented civilization with a side of snark. She gave mortals tools, not comfort. When a hero like Odysseus needed brains over brawn, Athena showed up. She didn't throw him a sword, she handed him a plan. And maybe a disguise, possibly involving a fake beard. You'd never call her fun, but you would call her effective. Like showing up to a job interview wearing a blazer made of warning signs. It said, "Don't even try." Every angle, every column, every marble groove whispered, Athena lives here and she measures things. It meant she didn't belong to anyone. She wasn't someone's wife, someone's prize, someone's excuse to start a war. There are a few ancient jokes about her being the goddess who never blinks or the one who smiles once per century. It's arguments. Its ability to outthink, outbuild, and outgovern everyone else. And at the center of that miracle was Athena, standing silent, polished spear in hand with an owl squinting behind her. You can almost imagine her watching mortals flail around and thinking, amateurs? She was the PowerPoint presentation to Ares' bar fight. And that meant her role wasn't just on the battlefield, it was in the war room. She helped generals plan sieges, advised kings in dreams, and probably would have made an excellent logistics officer if spreadsheets had existed. She was her own entity, sovereign and unbothered. A suspicious rash from questionable barley and knowing that this terrifyingly competent divine presence is watching your city like a principal who already knows who broke the statue in the courtyard. She wore a full breastplate, helmet, and a shield that sometimes had a literal monster face on it. Known as the Aegis, her shield bore the head of Medusa, yes, the one with snakes for hair and a very unfortunate backstory. Born directly from Zeus's skull, yes, his skull Athena skipped the whole baby phase. Most gods tangled themselves in mortal romance like tangled headphone cords. Athena's sacred animal wasn't majestic or fearsome. And if you're going to carve a statue of her, you better get the nose right. It was the owl bird known for silent judgment, staring eyes, and the kind of head-turning motion that says, I see what you did there, Chad, and I'm not impressed. Athena, meanwhile, stayed focused. The one time someone dared to approach her in the wrong way, well, we'll get to that in a later part. Spoiler, it involved immediate divine punishment and possibly permanent blindness. According to myth, Zeus had a headache. Not a normal headache, not even a post-party hangover sort of thing. Her temples were some of the cleanest spaces in ancient Greece. Priests and priestesses scrubbed them daily. Offerings had to be just right, no spoiled figs, no droopy garlands, and definitely no lazy sculpture placement. Athena noticed everything. It was like living under the eye of a divine HOA president. Either way, she made quite an entrance. No, this was an epic-splitting, head-cracking migraine. So what does he do? He has another god split his head open with an axe. Out pops Athena, fully grown, armored, and probably already annoyed. Historians, and by historians we mean exhausted mythology scholars, still debate whether this story was symbolic of wisdom born from the mind, or just a classic case of the Greeks being the Greeks. And from that very first moment, she made it clear she was not here to play around. Which made her the perfect patron for a city like Athens. One weird fact? She was also famous for saying very little. Athena didn't rant. But don't mistake her for cold. Athena was fiercely protective of the things she cared about: cities, craftspeople, olive farmers, lawgivers. She was also notably a virgin goddess, which wasn't just about not marrying. This set her apart from almost every other deity on Mount Olympus. Now, remember that creepy owl you keep seeing on old coins and tourist magnets? That's her doing. Athena's owl perched on her shoulder like an ever-watching reminder. Think before you speak. Plan before you act. Let's talk armor. Athena's outfit wasn't for decoration. It wasn't just for defense. The image itself was terrifying. Athena didn't invent war that was Ares' messy department. But she did invent organized war, strategic war. Even her temple design was precise. The Parthenon wasn't just a religious space, it was a monument to order, balance, and ratios that could make math nerds weep. That doesn't mean she was humorless. So now imagine being an average Athenian: dirty sandals, overdue taxes, but it worked. Because the city she patronized rose to greatness, not because of its size or weapons, but because of its ideas. And you live in her city now. You better start thinking smarter. If you thought Athena just stood on the Acropolis handing out wisdom like flyers, think again. She also had some serious opinions about what you wore and how you lived. Welcome to the ancient world's original fashion enforcer. Yes, Athena, goddess of war, wisdom, and workplace competence, was also the unofficial head of the Divine Dress Code Committee, and she judged you. Absolutely no exposed thighs unless you're preparing for battle or a statue of Hermes. The neckline? Modest? The vibe? I've already solved the problem, you're late. Now, let's be clear, Athena wasn't handing out togas like a divine tailor. But in myth, her very image set the standard for how respectable people, especially women, were supposed to present themselves. In classical Athens, proper women were expected to dress modestly and behave with a sort of controlled dignity that echoed Athena's image. One particular myth, which we'll get to in the next section, tells the story of a young woman who challenged Athena in a very fabric-based way. Let's just say it ended with spiders. But before we get ahead of ourselves, back to the temple. The fashion police weren't mythical, they were societal. You didn't want to be the girl who looked like she worshipped Dionysus instead. Tall, composed, armored, and completely unimpressed by trends. Just as she demanded tidy temples and tidy clothing, she inspired tidy laws. You could feel her presence in the silence between arguments, in the way the jurors clutched their voting discs. For a goddess so invested in order, Athena's myths are full of chaos. The gods were like that. They made rules and broke them before lunch, but Athena at least tried to set a standard. In the way that when someone stammered mid-speech, they might glance up as if hoping to see a sign from the goddess of strategy, maybe an owl blinking from a rooftop, maybe just the faint rustle of peplus in the wind. You didn't pray to Athena for love or luck. You prayed to her when you had a plan and needed it to work. She wasn't your therapist, she was your project manager, and she expected results. Measured, expected to do better next time. Athens prided itself on legal order and balanced governance, at least, by ancient standards. And Athena was always invoked as the goddess who oversaw fair judgment. Every 4 years, a giant robe was woven by specially chosen girls and offered to the statue of Athena. They weren't just artisans, they were acolytes, chosen for their skill and virtue. You didn't get that gig unless your weaving was top tier and your family had at least one olive grove. Not just any robe, this one was hand-dyed, embroidered with mythological scenes, and so large it had to be carried like a sail on a ship. Imagine walking through the city with a robe the size of a billboard, just so a statue could have a wardrobe update. When you entered a court, you were walking into her space. The statue inside looms quiet, a golden spear casting long shadows across the marble. Somewhere in the rafters, an owl stirs. If you lied, cheated, or tried to bribe a juror, you weren't just breaking the law. You were personally disappointing a war goddess. Her statues show her standing bolt upright, chin level, spear resting by her side, like she's about to correct your grammar and also launch a siege. It wasn't a place for messy emotions or dramatic prophecies. No, the Parthenon radiated cool authority. If you walked into her temple with mud on your sandals or your tunic hanging off one shoulder, you'd get looks. Okay, not from Athena herself, she was busy being a statue, but from the priests, from your neighbors, from that one old woman who somehow saw everything and whispered loudly about it at market. Even the statue of Athena inside, the colossal one made of gold and ivory, stood perfectly still. Her altars were stone, her columns clean and symmetrical. And her temple floors swept so often you could eat lentils off them, which no one did because they respected themselves. No raised weapon, no wild hair. Just calm, divine judgment in statue form. Probably blinking once every few centuries, just to keep everyone nervous. She wasn't sensual like Aphrodite or wild like Artemis. She was controlled. Her appearance didn't invite desire, it demanded respect. If she had an Instagram, it would be one post a year. Black and white photo, helmet on, caption, still thinking. Athena wore the Aegis, a breastplate or cloak fringed with snakes and stamped with the head of Medusa. Yes, Medusa. You wore a Gorgon's face to a meeting? Power move. Athena's message was clear. Look sharp or get turned into stone by association. So what was the Athena look? But it became so iconic that even emperors and generals centuries later tried to copy it. Spoiler. They didn't pull it off. Imagine this, a long flowing peplus kind of like a sleeveless dress, belted high under the bust, simple but elegant. No glitter, no feathers, and always with armor. Not just for battle, but for presence. Historians still debate whether the Aegis was a real object, a mythological metaphor, or just a warning label in shield form. It wasn't just her clothing that made her intimidating. It was her posture. Athena never slouched. This had ripple effects. That said, not everyone bought into the Athena aesthetic. The Parthenon, Athena's most famous temple, was a showcase of order, geometry, and intimidating decorum. And you weren't allowed to treat it casually. Even the furniture followed her aesthetic. No lounging couches or cushions here. Athena's influence also extended into civic behavior. And yes, people believe that Athena watched court cases. Of course, the real irony? One odd but telling tradition was the Panathenaic Peplis. This act wasn't just about fashion, it was civic devotion. The ritual honored craftsmanship, reverence, and female labor, all things Athena represented. And the weavers? So if Athena judged your outfit, your court behavior, your craftsmanship, and your posture, was there anything she didn't care about? Well, she wasn't huge on emotions. Or music, or cuddles. Now imagine it's nighttime. You're walking past her temple, cool breeze in the air, the scent of oil lamps and old stone filling your lungs. And as you adjust your tunic neatly, of course you can't help but feel it. The quiet weight of being seen. Not judged harshly, just observed. That's Athena, always watching. Always assessing. Never blinking. By now, you've probably figured out that Athena had a bit of a thing for excellence. She wasn't the type to hand out participation trophies or politely ignore a clumsy attempt at pottery. And if you tried to outdo her in her own field, well, let's just say you'd better have an escape plan and a strong tolerance for divine overreaction. That brings us to one of the most famous and least relaxing stories associated with Athena, the tale of Arachne. You're in a small town far from Athens. The kind of place with chickens wandering through the streets and neighbors who definitely gossip too much. There, in a dusty workshop near the edge of the square, a young woman is working the loom. Her name is Arachne. She's quiet, focused, and absurdly talented. The kind of weaver who can make wool look like running water, or stitch a scene so vivid that you'd swear it moved while you blinked, and she knows it. That's the problem. See, Arachne didn't just think she was the best weaver in town, or even in the region. No, she claimed loudly, confidently, and more than once that she was better than Athena herself, the goddess of weaving. The goddess hears everything. Do you really want to end up a cautionary tale? No rules, no do-overs. Just thread, skill, and tension so thick you could have stitched with it. What followed was not a friendly arts and crafts moment, it was mythological combat. But Arachne didn't care. She shrugged. She kept weaving, and eventually Athena showed up. She wove scenes of the gods in all their glory, Zeus on his throne, Poseidon splitting the sea, Athena herself handing mortals gifts of knowledge and power. Everything gleamed. Every thread shimmered. Apollo chasing nymphs who clearly weren't interested. Dionysus drinking too much and falling off a donkey. Even Athena herself caught mid-glare in a moment of divine pettiness. It was bold, it was scandalous. Every stitch, every color, every detail, it was divine. You could practically hear the celestial harp music. The very deity who invented the loom, the spindle, and probably the frustrating habit of threads tangling just when you think you're done. Of not being publicly humiliated by a very skilled mortal who clearly had no fear of divine consequences. She arrived disguised as an old woman, shawl overhead, voice creaky and kind. People warned her. They whispered behind their hands. Don't say that. But you shouldn't compare yourself to the gods. That kind of pride never ends well. Now, Athena didn't drop in with thunder or fanfare. She's everywhere, crawling in corners, spinning webs across your windows, dropping dramatically from ceilings just when you think you're alone. Was it a warning against hubris? A reminder to respect the gods? Or maybe it was just an explanation for where spiders come from woven into a tale that made people think twice before insulting their elders. You're talented, the old woman said, watching Arachne's fingers dance across the loom. After all, her legacy still clings to corners across the world. Knowing that excellence, even when it engages the gods, doesn't always end in oblivion. Sometimes it ends with a new beginning. A strange one, sure. 8 legs, fangs, a reputation for crawling into people's shoes. She didn't vanish. She just changed form, eternally spinning. Eternally weaving, her fingers twist, elongate, and harden. Her back arches. Fine hair spread across her body. Before she can scream, she's already spinning literally her own thread. Athena turns her into the first spider. Arachne, without even looking up, replied, "If Athena thinks she's better, she's welcome to prove it. Don't grab the broom, look closely. You might just be staring at one of the oldest artists in mythology, quietly creating thread by shimmering thread." You could hear the temperature drop. In some, Athena tears up the tapestry and beats Arachne with a shuttle. In others, she simply stares at the mortal with something worse than rage. Quiet disappointment. You brought this on yourself expression. The disguise melted away. There stood Athena, tall and gleaming, eyes like sharpened bronze. The other weavers scrambled out of the workshop, knocking over spindles and baskets of wool, probably muttering things like, "Well, that's the end of her." But Athena didn't smite her. Not right away. She did something worse. She accepted the challenge. A weaving contest. Goddess versus mortal. They set up their looms side by side. The air buzzed with tension. Even the chickens outside stopped clucking. Athena's tapestry, predictably, was perfect. And Arachne? She went a different route. Her tapestry showed the gods at their worst. Zeus cheating on his wife with mortals disguised as animals. And worst of all, it was flawless. Even Athena had to admit it. Arachne's work was perfect. And that made it worse. Because Athena wasn't just the goddess of weaving. She was the goddess of reputation, of order. So she did what gods often do in myths when they outmatched. She lost her temper. Different versions tell it differently. And then she curses her, not with fire, not with thunder. With transformation, Arachne begins to shrink. Her arms thin into legs. To this day, the Greek word for spider is Arachne. Historians still debate the moral of the story. But some have a different take. Maybe Arachne won, and if Athena had truly hated her, wouldn't she have destroyed her outright? Instead, she let her continue just differently. It's a strange comfort maybe, but still. Beginning. So next time you see a spider in the corner of your ceiling, take a breath. And maybe, just maybe, Athena is still watching, arms crossed, helmet tilted, waiting to see what she weaves next. Now let's talk about something no one ever asked for, mythical divine beauty pageants. Yes, because when you mix vanity, politics, and immortals, you don't get enlightenment, you get a celestial catfight that ends in a 10-year war. And at the center of this powder keg? Athena, again. Alongside her ever-graceful rivals, Hera, queen of the gods, and Aphrodite, goddess of love and chaos in glitter form. It all started with a wedding that didn't invite everyone. Always a great idea when dealing with jealous deities. You're at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, a mortal and a sea nymph. Lovely setting. Lots of grapes. The who's who of Mount Olympus are in attendance. Everyone's wearing their finest flowing robes and gold leaf sandals. Dionysus is already tipsy. Hermes is flirting with someone's cousin. The music's loud and someone's brought a goat for entertainment. Then in walks Eris. Eris is the goddess of discord. She wasn't invited for obvious reasons. But instead of throwing a tantrum, she pulls out a golden apple. Not just any apple. This one is inscribed with 3 simple words, "To the fairest." All eyes lock on that apple like it's the last slice of baklava at a feast. The music stops. Someone drops a goblet. A goat bleats nervously. The party vibe? Gone. Cue slow motion reaction shots. "Pick me," she says, "and you'll rule the world." Every goddess freezes. Athena, Hera, Aphrodite. The apple gets tossed into the mix, and immediately the 3 most powerful goddesses start claiming it. "I'm obviously the fairest," says Aphrodite, adjusting her perfect hair. "Have you seen my temples?" Which, let's be honest, probably didn't help her case. He's handsome, kind of clueless, and definitely not emotionally equipped to choose between 3 angry goddesses. Strategically, quietly, like someone who remembers what you said 6 years ago and is still planning a response. She's openly furious, but Athena plays the long game. She waits. But that doesn't stop Zeus from shoving the apple at him and saying, "You decide." "Excuse me," Hera snaps. "I'm literally the queen of Olympus." Athena rolls her eyes and mutters something about intellectual beauty being the only kind that lasts. A Spartan king with abandonment issues and a very large army. She advised generals, manipulated skirmishes, and whispered to heroes in their dreams. Her fingerprints are all over the Iliad, even when she's not named. Why storm a city when you can trick it into letting you inside? When the Greeks needed someone level-headed amid the ego circus that was the Trojan War, they looked up and hoped Athena was still paying attention. Others say it was a clever way of personifying human vanity, how one small act of pride can lead to disaster. Agamemnon leads the charge. Odysseus gets dragged away from his cozy island life. Achilles starts oiling up his armor. And Athena? She sides with the Greeks. And when the time came, she played the long game, guiding a war not for vengeance, but for balance. Somewhere in the chaos, a lone warrior glances upward, hoping for strength. Because in the end, she was the one still standing watching history unfold, one move ahead of everyone else. And far above in the clouds, a glint of bronze, a helmet, a calm gaze. Because to Athena, fairness wasn't just about beauty contests. It was about justice, even if it came wrapped in bloodshed and bad decisions. Unable to decide, the goddesses demand a mortal judge. Enter Paris. And also, maybe because war was a great excuse to demonstrate the value of strategy over looks. Paris is a Trojan prince with 0 qualifications in conflict mediation. The most famous military ruse in ancient history, the hollow wooden horse filled with Greek warriors, wasn't just Odysseus' clever idea. It had divine backing. And so Paris is whisked away to a quiet glade, where each goddess appears before him alone and makes her pitch. Hera offers him political power. Athena offers him victory and glory in battle. Choose me, she says, and I'll make you a hero among men. Aphrodite offers him love, or more specifically, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Guess which one he picked? Yep, Aphrodite wins. Paris hands her the apple, and thus begins the long, awkward silence between the other 2 goddesses and every Trojan alive. Athena, rejected, doesn't throw a tantrum. She simply files it away. Hera? And then, like clockwork, the consequences unfold. Because Aphrodite's gift to Paris was Helen of Sparta, who was notably already married to Menelaus. When Helen runs off, all of Greece mobilizes to get her back. Why? Because Paris insulted her. Because Troy protected the man who dared say she wasn't the fairest. Athena didn't just send soldiers. She sent plans, and she was. One weird detail? In some versions of the myth, Athena actually helps build the Trojan horse. Which fits. Athena always favored cleverness over brute force. Historians still debate whether the whole Golden Apple episode was a late addition to explain why the gods were so invested in a human war, but the myth endures. And not just because it's juicy, because it shows how Athena handled rejection. She didn't crumble, she didn't scream. She just waited. Now picture this. The battlefield is smoky, scattered with shields and broken spears. Athena never needed the apple. She never needed anyone to declare her the fairest dot, because in the end, she was the one still standing watching history unfold, one move ahead of everyone else. It's dawn in Athens, and the city hums with quiet tension. You're sweeping the steps outside your home, dusty tiles. Cracked pottery shards underfoot, and across the street, 2 boys are arguing about who would win in a fight, Hercules or Athena. Spoiler, it's not close. Athena would wipe the floor with him, and she wouldn't even break her helmet hair. Because here's the thing, Athena didn't just win battles. She designed entire wars. While Ares stomped around the battlefield like a toddler with a sword, Athena moved like a chess master. She wasn't flashy, she didn't scream, she got results. And nowhere is that clearer than in how the Athenians organized their military, built their ships, and fought their wars. And a spear that's taller than your neighbor Gregorios. It takes trust, timing, and practice. It's the military equivalent of a group project, except everyone is holding spears and one mistake could get you trampled. You stand shoulder to shoulder with other citizens in a formation called a phalanx, a human wall of bronze and willpower. In some statues, Athena is depicted with a small winged figure perched on her hand or shoulder. That's Nike, the goddess of victory. Not the shoe. Their prized worship was the trireme, a sleek, fast, terrifying machine with 3 levels of rowers and a massive bronze battering ram on the front. The drum beats. You pull the oar. Water sprays. Your crewmate smells like fish and regret. Then suddenly you hear a shout. The trireme surges forward and boom, you slam into an enemy ship, splintering it like a toothpick in a thunderstorm. The actual divine personification of "I told you I'd win." That's how tied Athena was to success in battle. Victory followed her around like a glorified sidekick. But if you asked an ancient Athenian, they'd say the goddess taught them everything. That she whispered into the ears of shipwrights, inspired generals, and stood unseen at the helms of their fastest vessels. And in theory, if everyone stays in line, you win. If even one guy panics and flees, game over. Let's start with hoplites. But Apollo defends him, claiming divine instruction. So they go to trial. Picture it, you're in line for battle. You've got a bronze helmet, a heavy round shield called an aspis. They turned it into something more than just a formation. They made it a philosophy. You were part of something larger. A turning point. And it framed Athena not just as a goddess of war, but of civilization. She didn't want endless cycles of violence. She wanted structure, rules, progress. And then, in a moment that changes mythology forever, she breaks a tie among the jurors, not with emotion, but with reason. She votes to acquit Orestes, saying that justice must evolve beyond revenge. You moved with precision, protected the man to your left, and knew the person to your right was doing the same. It was teamwork in armor. She's not like some gods, chasing mortals or throwing tantrums over apples. It's built in her image. She's methodical. Even her punishments are teaching moments. Her victories are earned. Her battles chosen carefully. But as an idea carried in every citizen's step, that's why the phalanx is so very Athena. It's orderly, disciplined, strategic. One person can't win it alone. Athens didn't invent the phalanx, but they perfected it. Hundreds of male citizens, chosen by lottery, sat as jurors. There were no lawyers, no judges, just citizens arguing their own cases, often with nothing but a short speech and an olive branch for luck, of reasoned outcomes. She valued truth, but also persuasion. Not the loudest voice, but the smartest. If a man won a case by being more clever, more rational, more strategic, that was Athena's kind of justice. And guess who they credited for that kind of strategic thinking? Athena. Now Ares, he liked things messy. He wanted blood and chaos and screaming. He was the god of passion and war. Athena, on the other hand, represented discipline. Ares might win a battle, but Athena would win a campaign. Ares would charge in. Athena would lay a trap. Ares wore blood. Athena wore blueprints, one weird but true detail. And if war happened at sea, even better. The Athenians, under her guidance, became absolute masters of naval warfare. Imagine the scene. You're sitting below deck, sweaty and sore, your arms numb from rowing. That's not just brute force. That's engineering, design, planning. Again, Athena's fingerprints all over it. Historians still debate how much of Athens' naval success was divine inspiration versus sheer human ingenuity. And war wasn't her only strategic domain. Athena also oversaw the legal battles of Athens, the courtroom conflicts where clever speech could matter more than a sword. Walk into a law court in ancient Athens, and you'd see a bizarre ritual of justice. And presiding over all this procedural chaos, in spirit at least Athena, she wasn't just a war goddess. She was a goddess of justice. The most famous example? The trial of Orestes. Quick version. Orestes kills his mother. The Furies, the terrifying goddesses of vengeance, want him punished. Who oversees the case? Athena? She listens. She thinks. It was a bold statement. And if that means stepping in and calming down a gang of literal vengeance spirits, so be it. What's more fascinating is how Athena never seems to act out of self-interest. So as you walk through Athens, past the agora, past the courts, down toward the harbor where triremes wait like coiled snakes, you start to realize the city Icend just named after Athena. Not flashy, but brilliant, not chaotic, but cunning. And in every clever law, every smart design, every disciplined phalanx, she lives on not as a statue on a hill, but as an idea carried in every citizen's step. Let's take a break from the courtroom and the battlefield and wander into a quieter, more mysterious corner of Athena's domain. The world of crafts, inventions, and things that required your brain to do more than just yell charge. Because if you thought she was just a war goddess with a thing for spears and strategic justice, think again. Athena was also the divine patron of the arts, not the fluffy, romantic kind, but the practical, hands-on, tool-based, slightly obsessive kind. The sort of art that requires blueprints and calluses. Need to build a chariot that doesn't fall apart mid-race? That's Athena. Trying to invent a plow that won't get stuck in rocks every 20 feet? She wasn't the goddess of vague inspiration. She was the goddess of results. You didn't just pray to her when you wanted ideas. You prayed to her when you wanted ideas that actually worked. The Panathenaic peplos, yes, that robe we mentioned earlier. The one woven every 4 years and offered to the massive statue of Athena in the Parthenon. Still Athena. Wondering if your bronze mirror should be hammered or cast. They cleaned the wool, dyed it with saffron, spun the thread, and began to weave the robe. Even that one guy who complains about everything admitted the stitching was pretty nice. It depicted mythological scenes of Athena's triumphs and was carried to the temple like a sacred banner. But what's clear is that it reinforced Athena's status as a goddess who created, who valued the handmade, the carefully built, the deliberately stitched. Yes, the thing you used to control a horse. That single invention opened up warfare, agriculture, and transportation in a way no heroic poem ever could. It's not flashy, but it's Athena through and through. Better ask Athena first or risk looking like a lopsided frog for eternity. She was playing around literally and figured out how to shape reeds into pipes that made hauntingly beautiful music. So she tried it, played a few tunes, impressed herself. You see, Athena didn't just value knowledge, she valued useful knowledge. In ancient Greece, weaving wasn't just a domestic chore. It was an art form, and it was deeply sacred to Athena. And Athena, the queen of dignity, was not about to go around looking like she'd just eaten a lemon. But the moral here? Athena didn't care about fame or applause. She cared about control. She stood just off to the side, arms crossed, helmet tilted, offering advice that if you ignored, usually resulted in something getting eaten, stabbed, or transformed into a bird. And if an invention didn't fit her image, she abandoned it. Not a weapon, just a mirror, so he wouldn't have to look directly at her. Clever, quiet, effective. Columns curved just slightly inward so they looked straight from below. No detail too small, no corner cut. It was the world's most intimidating resume, carved in marble. It was about participating in an ancient practice that linked generations together with every pull of thread. To not spill your olive oil on the sacred floor. Mothers taught daughters. Temples trained priestesses. Every piece of cloth was part labor, part prayer. Their city became a hub for philosophers, builders, mathematicians, and artists. Not because they were chasing beauty for its own sake, but because they were trying to understand it. One weird detail. She supposedly invented the bridle, with your brain working quietly in the background like a loom. And then there's the loom. We've touched on weaving already, Arachne, spider trauma, divine tantrums, but now let's look closer. Young girls didn't just learn to weave. They were taught to do it as a ritual. Creating cloth wasn't about fashion. The best example? Let's zoom in on that. Each year, a special team of maidens chosen more for their family status than their desire to be unpaid interns would begin the process. Imagine a parade where the big celebrity is a robe, and yet it worked. Crowds cheered, musicians played. Historians still debate whether the peplos was purely symbolic or whether it served some actual ritual purpose. And speaking of inventions, let's talk about the flute incident. According to one myth, Athena invented the flute. Then she caught her reflection in a pool of water while playing, and didn't like what she saw. Apparently, blowing into the flute puffed up her cheeks in a way that she found deeply unflattering. So what did she do? She threw the flute away, just tossed it into the woods. No ceremony, no regrets. The story goes that a satyr, one of those goat-legged, wine-loving party creatures, found it later, played it like a rock star, and took all the credit. Athena's inventions weren't just for mortals. In myths, she often equipped heroes with the tools they needed to succeed without stealing the spotlight. She gave Perseus the polished shield he used to slay Medusa. She helped Bellerophon tame Pegasus, not by force, but by handing him a golden bridle in a dream. She didn't fight the battles. She made them winnable, and that's very Athena. She didn't crave center stage. Even architecture was touched by her influence. The Parthenon wasn't just a temple. It was a manifest of symmetry, precision, proportion. Walking into the Parthenon, you wouldn't feel awe so much as pressure. Pressure to stand up straight, to speak in full sentences, and yet somehow that reverence inspired the Athenians. That's what Athena offered, not just inspiration, but guidance. Not just a muse, but a mentor. So as you sit there listening, maybe fiddling with something on your desk folding paper, drawing lazy circles, twisting your bedsheet into a surprisingly sophisticated braid, know this: you're engaging in one of Athena's rituals. You are making something, with care, with your hands. And maybe, just maybe, she's still watching, not judging, just observing. Quietly impressed. Let us wander back to a moment when the gods weren't yet picking sides or flinging mortals into new species. A time before Athena was the star of courtroom dramas and ship design. And in classic Greek fashion, that meant a divine showdown complete with egos, showmanship, and a contest no mortal dared to judge. Let's go all the way back to when she first became the goddess of Athens. You might think it was always her city. That the name Athens says it all. But the truth is, Athena had to win it. Here's the setup. Long ago, the region that would become Athens was just a clump of scattered settlements. A rocky hill here, a small fishing port there, a few goat herders yelling at clouds. The gods looked down and saw potential. A city worth claiming. And two deities decided they were up for the job, Athena and Poseidon. Yes, that Poseidon. God of the sea, earth shaker, beard like a waterfall and temper like a caffeinated octopus. Poseidon wasn't used to rejection. And then made that face the one you make when you think it's lemonade but it's vinegar. Because Poseidon had, unfortunately, created a fountain of seawater, beautiful, completely useless. Which, let's be honest, is exactly the kind of hybrid creature ancient Athens would casually appoint to high office. No seismic drama. Just a quiet walk to the same spot where she knelt down and planted something. When invaders burned it down, the story goes, it regrew overnight, not a metaphor, a miracle. He flooded part of the land in a hissy fit, then stormed off to do more sea god things, sinking ships, inventing horses, generally scowling at coastlines, but the city was named Athens. And from that moment on, it belonged to her. She helped design the city, advising on walls, roads, temples. She didn't just bless it, she helped build it. She was like a divine architect with a clipboard, muttering about drainage systems and urban planning. And you better believe it made a good souvenir photo spot. A tiny seed. A heartbeat later, the first olive tree sprang from the soil. The leaves shimmered silver green. The fruit glistened in the sun, and the people leaned in. She was a living myth, baked into the city's bones. He showed up first, stormy and proud, struck the ground with his trident, and boom, a saltwater spring burst from the rock. Some say it's a metaphor for Athens choosing wisdom over war, cleverness over brute force. Others think it reflects a very real tension between land and sea power in the early days of the polis. Water gushed everywhere, impressive, majestic, slightly briny. The people gathered around and nodded. Nice, they dipped a finger in. Tasted it. And giants locked in eternal poses, you'd see her tree still there, quiet, unassuming, slightly crooked from the wind. Sometimes just a hand on the bark, a silent thank you. Then came Athena, no lightning. Olives meant food, oil, wood, trade, lamps, wreaths, peace offerings. Even moisturized elbows if that was your thing. You felt her presence in the discipline of hoplite drills and the hum of loom threads. Athena didn't offer power. She offered sustainability. One weird fact? That original olive tree, the one planted by Athena herself, was supposedly still growing near the Arachne temple well into Roman times. So now the gods had a dilemma. Whose gift was better? They turned to a panel of judges, either the gods themselves or, in some versions, the first king of Athens, a guy named Cecrops who was half man, half snake. Cecrops or the divine jury made the obvious choice. They picked Athena. Poseidon didn't take it well. Now here's where it gets stranger. Instead of taking the victory and demanding endless praise, Athena got to work. You, if you lived there, would see her influence in every part of life. In the Agora, where merchants sold olive oil and clay amphory marked with Athena's symbol. In the workshops, where potters painted her profile with that iconic helmet and expression that said, "You should have centered the handle better." In the festivals, where maidens marched with woven offerings, songs echoing the story of the contest. Athena wasn't just a deity on a hill. Historians still debate whether the contest ever had any real cultural ceremony behind it, or whether it was a late invention to explain the city's name. But to the Athenians, it was simple. Athena chose them, and they chose her. One olive tree for one city. No explosions, no grand speeches. Just a gift that grew roots. And if you climb the Acropolis centuries later through marble gates, past carved friezes of gods, people still left offerings at its base. A wreath, a few coins. Because while Poseidon gave them a moment of awe, Athena gave them a future. And every time someone dipped bread into golden oil, or lit a lamp on a quiet night, or carved a tool from olive wood, they were continuing that story. And you? You're a part of it too now. You walked through her city. Heard her name whispered in courtroom debates and painted on broken pottery. You live, in a way, beneath her branches. And if you stop for a second, just breathe, just listen, you might hear the leaves rustle, not with wind, with history. Let's talk festivals now. Because if you think the ancient Greeks spent all their time philosophizing, weaving, and marching in tight hoplite formations, well, yes, they did a lot of that, but they also knew how to throw a good party. Bakers are frantically kneading dough. Priests rehearse prayers they've said 1,000 times. And out in the countryside, young athletes are oiling themselves up for the foot races. Because nothing says devotion like running half naked for divine approval. You'd be forgiven for thinking it was just a parade, but it was more than that. It was civic theater, religious devotion, and public fashion show all in one. Citizens of all ranks participated, priestesses, soldiers, weavers, elders, medics, even kids carrying baskets. It wound through the city, up to the Acropolis like a living river of color and chanting. A lot. And not just any cows. The best, most symmetrical cows. The kind of cows that make you think, wow, that is a particularly nice cow. They were marched in, often draped in garlands, serenaded, and then, well, it wasn't a vegan festival. The goal, keep the flame alive while sprinting through narrow, twisty streets. Drop it, you're out. Burn your own foot? Also out, trip and faceplant into a fruit stand? Very out, but also kind of legendary. And when it came to Athena, her party was the biggest, loudest, most olive-themed event in town, the Panathenea. The Panathenea also had games. This was ancient Greece, after all. A single amphora could feed a family, light a house, or bribe a minor official. So winning one? A big deal. Some even argue that the festival's grandeur was partly political, a way to remind citizens, medics, and allies alike that Athens was a big deal. And poor, native and foreign-born, young and old played their part in honoring wisdom itself. Praise heaped upon her wisdom, her strength, her mercy, though, let's be honest, the mercy part might have been a bit optimistic. Still, there's something moving about an entire city coming together, not in fear, but in admiration. Lovers whispered promises beneath Athena's stone gaze. Even the stray cats seemed more solemn, tail flicking around altars. There were chariot races, wrestling, discus, javelin, and even a musical contest or two imagined lyre solos played with competitive intensity. And in the dark, if you looked up, you might think you saw her standing there, helmet gleaming, spear planted beside her, just watching. Winners didn't get trophies. They got amphory massive ceramic jars filled with precious olive oil, straight from Athena's sacred groves. Imagine Athens in midsummer. The streets buzz with preparations. Someone's yelling about wool deliveries. It comes from familiarity. As long as they kept the olive trees pruned and the amphory full, she would protect them. The Panathenea wasn't your average temple potluck. It was the Super Bowl of religious festivals, a multi-day extravaganza held every year with a deluxe, full-scale version every 4 years, kind of like the Olympics, but with more hymns and fewer medals. At the center of it all, Athena, of course. Because they believed truly that their city flourished under her watchful gaze. The festival kicked off with a massive procession, called the Pomp, of their goddess. The freshly woven peplus, that famous saffron robe embroidered for Athena's statue. The smell of myrrh and sweat and roasted meat hanging in the air. Dignitaries and spotless chittens trying not to trip on uneven pavement. The statue of Athena Polias waiting silently in her temple to receive her gift. Carried upright like a sail on a ceremonial cart shaped like a ship, it fluttered in the breeze as if the goddess herself were arriving by sea and leading the parade. Now, picture that scene for a moment. Thousands of sandals scuffing the stones, drums echoing off marble walls. One weird but delightful tradition, the sacrificial animals. Yes, they sacrificed a lot of cows during the Panathenea, but it wasn't all somber rites and altar smoke. Side note, olive oil was serious business. It wasn't just cooking grease. It was currency, medicine, skincare, and lamp fuel. There was even a unique race called the torch relay or lampidodromia, where runners passed a lit torch from one to the next. And all the sweat, the chanting, the sprinting, the sacred cows was for Athena. She didn't demand it. She didn't smite anyone for skipping a day, but the Athenians wanted to honor her. Even the poets got involved. Hymns were sung, stories recited. And not just admiration of a goddess. Historians still debate exactly how the Panathenea evolved over time, whether it started purely as a religious rite or was always intended as a civic bonding ritual. But even if the motivations were mixed, the result was undeniable. For a few days every year, Athens became a stage where everyone rich, and when night fell during the festival, the city didn't sleep. Torches glowed on rooftops. Musicians played under archways. Children stayed up late, faces sticky with honey cakes. The Acropolis loomed above it all, its temples casting long shadows, lit by moonlight and firelight alike. Not judging, just there. And the people really believed that as long as they honored her, as long as they wove her robe and carried it through the streets, that kind of faith, it doesn't come from fear. From knowing your goddess isn't distant thunder, but the steady hum of the loom, the curve of an amphora, the flicker of a torch on a summer night. So maybe the Panathenea wasn't just about Dina. Maybe it was about what she inspired people to be: clever, generous, united, and just a little bit olive-scented. Now let's descend from the olive-scented heights of festival joy and into something a little murkier because, like all gods worth their weight in myths, Athena wasn't without contradictions. She was logical, yes, wise, of course, but also stubborn, protective to a fault. And occasionally, she made decisions that still make historians squint and go, why? Well, let's just say Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia to get favorable wains for his warships. And then, boom, Apollo tells you to avenge your father by killing your mother. Divine orders. You know, typical ancient Greek marriage drama. Wait, what? Tonight, let's pull back the curtain on one of her more confusing moments, her involvement in the trial of Orestes, and what that says about her strange brand of justice. They chase Orestes across Greece. He flees to Delphi. Apollo tries to help but can't shake them off. Finally, Orestes makes a last-ditch effort and runs to Athens, begging Athena for help. So you're Orestes. Bad day already. Your dad, Agamemnon, has returned home from the Trojan War only to be murdered in the bathtub by your mom, Clytemnestra. They are old, ancient, wrinkled, clawed. They wear snakes like scarves. They represent vengeance so old it predates Zeus himself. The Furies argue that justice must be served matricide is unforgivable. It's tense, it's poetic. There are probably lots of dramatic speeches and toga flapping. Anyway, your mom and her new lover, it's just this: kill your dad. Years pass. You grow up angry. So you do. And immediately, the Furies arrive. Now, the Furies, also known as the Erinyes, are not the sparkly winged justice fairies you might be imagining. But mostly, she's making a statement that justice must move forward. That vengeance, while understandable, can't rule forever, and they are livid. Protectors of justice, enforcers of oaths, guardians of balance. You killed your mother no matter the reason. And in their book, that's a crime that demands eternal punishment. Why? Because Athena doesn't mock them or try to erase them. She includes them. She gives them a seat at the new table of justice. Some argue that it mirrors Athens' shift from clan-based vengeance to centralized law courts. Others think it's a political flex. Look at us, inventing democracy and jury trials, while Sparta's still solving everything with pointy sticks. Here's where it gets weird. Athena listens. She doesn't yell. She doesn't smite. She decides it's time for a trial. She's saying, let us end the era where justice is just revenge with fancier costumes. Of long-term stability even when it hurts in the short term. This is new, or arguing in the Agora about what's right or wrong. And in the back of your mind, you remember Orestes, the Furies, the tie-breaking vote. No one's ever tried to reason with the Furies before. But Athena, being Athena, isn't about endless blood cycles. She wants structure. She wants a system. So she sets up the first jury trial in human history. She chose structure over sentiment, logic over passion, systems over fury, 12 citizens, 2 sides. Orestes makes his case. He had a divine command. Apollo backs him up. Then the jury votes, and it's a tie. Cue the awkward silence. Everyone looks at Athena. She steps forward. And she casts her vote for acquittal. Why? She says it's because she doesn't have a mother, so she feels no natural bond to one. This is a turning point in myth. Athena isn't just saying, let's give this guy a break. She even offers the Furies a job upgrade. No more terrifying underworld rage ranting. She invites them to become the Eumenides, the kindly ones. And here's the weird part. They agree. They let go of their bloodlust and take the deal. That's not just clever. That's revolutionary. Historians still debate whether this myth was a reflection of real Athenian legal reforms or just an elaborate moral metaphor. Whatever the origin, the message is clear. Athena wanted something better than revenge. But the trial of Orestes also reveals something deeper. Athena's justice wasn't always warm. It wasn't about empathy. It was about order. That makes her complicated. And isn't that what makes her so fascinating? She's not the goddess of hugs. She's the goddess of the bigger picture, of difficult decisions. And if you lived in ancient Athens, that story would matter. You might be on trial one day or on a jury. You do remember that justice isn't about who yells the loudest, it's about who builds the best argument. And you might feel just a little comforted knowing that somewhere up above on a high stone hill, surrounded by marble columns and olive trees, a goddess was watching. Not to punish you, not to forgive you, but to weigh you fairly. Let's change gears. We've seen Athena the judge, the strategist, the inventor. But tonight we're heading underground into myths that don't fit neatly into temples or courtroom scrolls. Because for all her logic and discipline, Athena had secrets. Especially when it came to children, or rather a child. One that no one really talks about at dinner parties. Buckle in. It's time to meet Arachne. Ooh, Athena, mortified, grabs some wool, wipes it up, tosses it away. And from that spot on the earth, a child is born. No, that's not a new skin cream or a Mediterranean appetizer. Arachne was a mythical king of Athens. Born in a way that's, well, complicated. Here's how it goes. Why? Unclear. Maybe it was the helmet. Maybe the war goddess vibe. Maybe the fact that she was not interested made her more interesting. Arachne grows up to be a wise, innovative king. He introduces chariot racing, builds shrines, establishes festivals. The whole city loves him. But no one forgets that he came from the dirt, from a mess, from something not quite natural. One day, Hephaestus, the god of blacksmithing, volcanoes, and unfortunate romantic decisions, decides he wants to marry Athena. But Hephaestus, being a literal hothead, tries anyway. A child connected to the earth with something primal, strange, and serpentine. Because yes, when your birth involves snake parts and cosmic mishaps, it's only polite to immortalize you in the night sky. And she didn't parade him around as proof of her virtue. She raised him in secret, let him grow, let him learn. A reminder that not everything in her world could be planned or reasoned with. Technically, no father either, depending on your definition. A spot where Arachne was believed to have been buried. A mark on the floor where Hephaestus supposedly struck the earth. They didn't cover up the weirdness. They built around it. Then maybe your own mistakes, your own weird beginnings aren't the end either. He just springs out of the earth. His name literally means trouble from the ground. A reminder that greatness can spring from the soil, from serpents, from mistakes. That even the most rational goddess had once made a choice that didn't make sense and loved it anyway. Others think he was a myth designed to explain an ancient royal lineage justifying a king who didn't quite fit the usual mold. A divine outsider, a chosen one. Now Athena was famously virgin-born, famously uninterested in relationships, and famously not here for Hephaestus's nonsense. Long story short, he chases her, she fights him off, and in the scuffle, how to put this delicately, spills a bit of his divine essence on the ground. Maybe that made her feel closer to Arachne. Two strange arrivals, two divine accidents. No cradle songs or lullabies, just the pressure of being something that was never supposed to exist. Arachne. Not as a mother, because again she avoids all that, but more like a divine foster parent. The myths differ. Some say the baby had a serpent's tail. Others say he was a snake from the waist down. Either way, not your typical diaper-changing situation. She hides him in a box, gives it to 3 mortal women, and says, "Do not open this." No mother. Athena, for reasons she never fully explains, decides to raise the child herself. Now, what happens when you tell humans not to open a mysterious box? They open it. Inside, they find something so horrifying they either go mad or leap off the Acropolis. But Athena doesn't give up. She takes him in fully, raises him in her temple, and eventually places him on the throne of Athens. And that's the crux of it. Athene, perfect, armored, always in control, chose to care for a child born of chaos. One weird detail. Arachne was eventually placed among the stars as a constellation. Some say he became part of Auriga, the charioteer. Historians still debate what Arachne represents. Some say he's a symbol of Athens itself, half human, half serpent, tied to both intellect and nature. But whatever he was, he showed us something rare in Athena, a soft spot. She didn't create him. She didn't ask for him. But she took responsibility, quietly, devotedly, and maybe, just maybe, she saw a little of herself in him. Because Athena wasn't born from a mother either. She came from Zeus's head, fully armored, already frowning. And if you were a citizen of Athens, you'd hear this story not as a scandal, but as a myth of origin. Walk through the Erechtheion on the Acropolis, and you'd find sacred traces of this tale, a hidden shrine. Because that's the Athenian way. They didn't deny chaos. They outsmarted it. And if Athena could embrace a serpent-legged baby and raise him into a king, maybe, like Arachne, you just need someone wise to see past the mess and say, you belong here. Let's get to work. Let's head into the shadows, now into the part of the story where Athena's calm mask starts to crack a little. Because while she's usually the cool-headed goddess of strategy and justice, there are moments, rare ones, where emotion sneaks through. And one of the strangest, most unsettling of these is the tale of Medusa. You know Medusa, right? Snake hair. Turns men to stone. Poster child for don't look directly at your problems. But what most people forget or never knew is that Medusa wasn't always a monster. Not a smart thing to say in a world where the gods are extremely online when it comes to flattery. In fact, she started out as something else entirely, not with flowers. Not to worship. Poseidon saw her, wanted her, and took what he wanted. A human. A beautiful mortal woman. So beautiful, in fact, that people whispered she was even more stunning than the goddesses themselves. And here's where it gets messy. A moment of brutality inside the very heart of Athena's domain. One day, Medusa was in Athena's temple. Some versions say she was a priestess there when Poseidon showed up, right there. In Athena's sacred space. A god commits a crime and the victim is blamed. You want to understand it, but your brain keeps shouting, what? It was an unspeakable violation. She gives him a polished bronze shield, basically the mythological equivalent of a rearview mirror, and tells him not to look directly at her. Use the reflection. Be smart. Be sneaky. Be Athena-level strategic. And what does Athena do? He sneaks in while Medusa sleeps, uses the shield to guide his hand, and slices off her head in a single strike. She punishes Medusa. A wind horse named Pegasus and a warrior named Chrysaor. Strange children, born from pain and silence. Eventually, he gives the head to Athena. Another moment in Greek myth where death becomes a kind of dark birth. Except, not quite. Instead, she turns Medusa's hair into snakes and curses her with a gaze that turns people to stone. Not Poseidon, the aggressor, not the man who defiled her temple. A weapon forged from trauma, a face frozen in terror turned into power. It's one of those moments in mythology where everything feels upside down. Did she remember that moment in the temple, the terrible choice she made, the consequences that rippled out across myths? She defends justice, but her justice can feel clinical, detached, and deeply unfair. She supports heroes, but not always the victims. Some argue that Athena's punishment wasn't vengeance, but protection, that she gave Medusa a weapon, a defense, a way to ensure she'd never be hurt again. This terror, this memory? I've turned it into armor. Others think Athena was more concerned with the sanctity of her temple than the people inside it. And some say this tale was warped, later reshaped by poets and painters with their own agendas. Historians and storytellers still debate this one fiercely. Marching into battle, unflinching, untouchable, and yet perhaps just a little haunted. Because it isn't clean. It isn't simple. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. But regardless of the intention, Medusa's transformation is deeply tied to Athena. And it doesn't end there. Years later, Athena helps Perseus, the classic Greek hero with more confidence than sense, on his quest to slay Medusa. Perseus does exactly that, victory, because the moment Medusa dies, two beings erupt from her body. Perseus escapes. He carries Medusa's head in a bag, uses it to petrify monsters and enemies like a mythological cheat code. And what does she do? She mounts it on her aegis, the magical shield or breastplate she wears into battle. It's chilling when you think about it. But it's also very Athena. She doesn't let things go to waste. She turns ugliness into strength. She weaponizes what others might try to bury. And yet, it leaves you wondering, did she see Medusa's face every time she lifted her shield? Or was the aegis just another tool? A way to say, this is mine now. You can't talk about Athena without talking about this contradiction. She's the goddess of wisdom, but sometimes makes cold decisions that feel anything but wise. And yet, the Medusa story remains one of the most retold, repainted, and reinterpreted myths of the ancient world. Like, can a protector also be a punisher? Can trauma be turned into power without losing something human in the process? And how do you live with a shield that carries someone else's pain? There are no easy answers. Only that image, Athena, bronze helmet, gleaming in the light, carrying a face frozen in fear. And if you find that unsettling, good. Athena isn't meant to make you comfortable. She's meant to make you think. Let's take a step back from war gods and stone gazes and enter a softer space. Well, softer for ancient Greece, which means nobody gets impaled in this part. Because if Athena's myths are full of battles and clever traps, they're also filled with whispers about something she didn't have, love. Unlike most gods who, let's face it, couldn't walk past a cloud without falling in love with it, Athena famously stayed single. No lovers, no crushes, no wild weekend romances. Her armor stayed fastened and her calendar was always clear. Athena lived among people. She gave advice. She supported heroes. She was there in the thick of city life, temple business, and political drama. Why? That's a question ancient storytellers danced around for centuries. The one no one dared flirt with unless they wanted to be turned into a bird. She wasn't like Artemis, who avoided love because she valued wild independence and solitude in nature, but always as the wise one, the unattached one. But the Greeks had a special word for it. Parthenis, a virgin, yes, but more than that. Never leaned down from Olympus with soft eyes and a trembling lip, perhaps Medusa's fate, or the chaos caused by Aphrodite's constant meddling. Or maybe deep down she just saw emotions as liabilities, chinks in the armor she refused to take off. No dramatics, just quiet assistance. The way a teacher might help a favorite student. It's like the whole world just knew. Don't even think about it. If that student regularly stabbed cyclopes and offended sea gods, she didn't need flirtation to command attention. She didn't want it. No rivalries over a stolen glance. No tragedies about a heart turned cold. It's the temple of the virgin. That word Parthenos was carved into stone and skyline, shouted by priests, embroidered on pepless robes. It was her brand. A woman who was entirely her own. Not claimed, not bound, not softened by someone else's love. Was she a symbol of feminine strength, proof that women didn't need men to be divine? Or was her virginity a way to make her more acceptable to a male-dominated world? And maybe you think that's just who she was. No interest in the whole emotional mess. Maybe you've been the smart one, the quiet one, the responsible one, while everyone else ran around making bad decisions on purpose. Not because you don't feel, but because you've trained yourself not to need. It was part of her identity. And standing alone, not because you have to, but because you can. One poet claimed she had a tender fondness for Odysseus, smart, sneaky, always one step ahead of everyone else. You can see the appeal. And yet, she was the most respected goddess in the Greek world. Statues rose for her, cities named for her. Wisdom shaped in her image. She was proof that your value didn't have to come from being chosen. That you could choose yourself. But if she loved him, it was never spoken. While Zeus chased nymphs and Apollo played his lyre for doomed lovers, Athena was helping build cities, ending blood feuds, inspiring scholars. In fact, one of her most famous temples, the Parthenon, is literally named after it. It's not just the Temple of Athena. But of course, people being people, they still speculated. There were rumors, half-whispers. She helped him, sure, guided him. Saved his life more than once, but never kissed him. Another version? A subtle, tragic suggestion that Athena stayed removed from love because of what she'd seen. Here as a weird fact, there is not a single surviving story of anyone successfully wooing Athena. Not one. Even Artemis, the untouchable huntress, has a few suitors who try. But Athena? People don't even try. She walked with power and silence. She looked people in the eye and made kings stammer, and that left her slightly apart. Respected, yes, worshipped deeply, but never drawn into the tangled web of godly love affairs, just Athena. Above it, beyond it. Of course, that meant she could focus fully on everything else: politics, invention, warfare, culture. Historians still debate whether this aspect of Athena was empowering or isolating. It's hard to say. But what's certain is that she became a role model, especially for women who felt different. Outsiders, thinkers, builders, and you? Maybe you know the feeling. Maybe you've walked into a room and realized you were the only one not talking about a partner, a date, a drama. Maybe you felt like Athena, armored, helpful, distant. If so, know this, there's strength in that too, in choosing thought over impulse. Athena didn't marry, didn't flirt, didn't swoon. And while she never held someone's hand on a beach or cried into a shoulder at midnight, she built civilizations. She mentored heroes. She changed the world. Maybe that's a different kind of love, not romantic, but enduring. If you've been wondering when Athena finally lets her hair down, well, surprise, she never does. But she does get involved in some truly chaotic competitions. Because despite being a goddess of strategy and reason, Athena loved a good challenge. Not a beauty pageant, of course, never that, but a battle of skill, of artistry, of human ambition pushed just a little too far. Flowers in her threads looked like they'd sway if you breathed too close. She spun gold like straw and dyed her wool with colors no one else could blend. She didn't just make cloth, she made stories. And that brings us to the tale of Arachne. Now, Arachne was a mortal woman who lived in Lydia, which, just to orient you, was one of those ancient regions where half the population ended up in myths and the other half made wine. She wasn't royalty, she wasn't a priestess, she was a simple weaver. But oh, what a weaver she was! They say her tapestries were so detailed, birds tried to land on them thinking they were real branches. People started whispering, "This girl's better than Athena." The air shimmered with tension and dyed thread. The only sound was the whisper click of weaving as the two worked side by side in silence. And if Greek myth has taught us anything, it's that you never say that out loud. Athena, to her credit, didn't show up swinging a spear. She disguised herself as an old woman, one of her favorite tricks, and shuffled over to Arachne's workshop. She said, in the voice of someone who owns too many cats, "My dear, don't challenge the gods." It showed Poseidon and his misdeeds. Dionysus in a drunken haze, Apollo's cruel tricks. It was brilliant, bold, painfully honest, and flawless in every technical way. Just say you were inspired by Athena. No one needs to get smited today. But Arachne didn't back down. Her technique was flawless, her colors heavenly, her meaning clear. Don't mess with divinity. She crossed her arms and said something like, if she thinks she's better, she can come prove it. And then, in a fit of rage, not at the craftsmanship, but at the audacity, she tore Arachne's tapestry in two. She struck the girl down. Some versions say she beat her with the looms shuttle. Others say she cursed her with a divine glare. So Athena revealed herself, lightning crackled, looms rattled. Everyone probably dropped their thread and scattered like pigeons. And the challenge was on. 2 looms. 2 goddesses, well, 1 goddess and 1 dangerously confident mortal. Athena, unsurprisingly, wove a glorious scene, the gods in Olympus, majestic and powerful in perfect order. Pity? Recognition? She stepped in, loosened the rope, and transformed Arachne into a spider. And Arachne? A backhanded compliment from Athena. You're too good to die forgotten, so I'll make sure the world sees your work forever, even if it's from beneath a windowsill. Well, she wove something else. She didn't glorify the gods, she called them out. A creature that's both artist and exile, neither honored nor forgotten. The Greek word for spider is Arachne, straight from this myth. I told the truth. I created something that couldn't be ignored. Or maybe an acknowledgement that talent sometimes threatens power, and the response isn't always fair. Every spider in your bathroom, every cobweb in your attic, named for a mortal who dared to rival a goddess and paid for it with her shape. Her tapestry showed Zeus transforming into animals to chase women. There was no mistake. Arachne had won, which is exactly why everything went terribly wrong when someone in power didn't like the truth you told. When your boldness wasn't rewarded but turned against you. Athena stood up, face unreadable. And Arachne, devastated, fled and tried to hang herself. Here's where the myth takes a turn. Athena, seeing this, felt a flicker of something guilt. Not out of cruelty, but as a kind of twisted reward. You want to weave forever? Athena seemed to say, then you shall. And so Arachne became the first spider, tiny, silent, endlessly spinning webs in corners and trees and old temples. One weird fact? Historians still debate what this myth meant to the Greeks. Was it a warning to stay humble? A nod to the idea that truth can be dangerous? Some scholars argue that Arachne's punishment wasn't punishment at all, it was immortality. And you? Maybe you've had a moment like Arachne's, when you poured your heart into something only to have it torn apart. If so, here's the comfort. Arachne won. She proved her worth. She made something perfect. Even Athena in her fury didn't deny it. And though she was transformed, she was never erased. Look up at any spider's web stretched across morning dew, and you'll see the myth still alive, each thread a defiant whisper. And maybe Athena, wherever she is now, looks down at those webs and thinks, all right, maybe she was just a little better. It's time we talk about armor. Not the clunky, knight in shining armor kind, but the kind you wear every day, the invisible stuff, the walls you put up, the tone you adopt. The eye rolls, the planning, the I'm fine. And no one wore this kind of armor better or more literally than Athena. Because she wasn't just born wearing armor. She was armor. Let's rewind to the very beginning. Athena didn't arrive in the world the usual way. No lullabies, no diapers, no baby teeth. Instead, she exploded fully grown and fully armed from her father Zeus's head. Zeus had a splitting headache one day, likely caused by swallowing his pregnant wife, Medusa, in a panic after a prophecy said her child would overthrow him. In some versions, Hephaestus grabs a hammer and cracks Zeus's skull open like a coconut. Out jumps Athena, armor gleaming, shield raised, shouting a war cry so loud it made the earth tremble. Logical reaction? Eat the mom. Classic Zeus. Yep. Head. It's one of those myths that makes you pause and check if you heard it right. Anyway, the headache gets so bad he calls for help. No childhood, no awkward teen years. Just pure immediate presence. Now imagine that your first moment in existence is war. She wore a gleaming breastplate, carried a shield with Medusa's head on it, and rocked a helmet that somehow looked stylish and intimidating at the same time. Did she build walls around herself because she was too powerful to be vulnerable? Or because she never learned how? She watched over you with eyes that seemed to say, "You're safe, but don't get sloppy." She was the picture of readiness. Of, "Don't even try me." That's not exactly a calm start. When someone hurt you and instead of lashing out, you sat in silence and made a list. When your friends said, "You're so strong," and you smiled, but inside all you could think was, "It's not strength. It's just armor." From that point on, Athena and her armor were inseparable. They prayed for clarity, for decisiveness, for the strength to act, not just feel. She won by outthinking everyone else, by never letting anyone see her flinch, by being the one in the room who already knew the outcome. But her armor wasn't just metal. It was attitude. It said, "I am prepared." It reminded everyone, gods, mortals, monsters, that wisdom wasn't passive. It was active, tactical, wielded with intent. When mortals came to her for advice, she gave strategy, not sympathy. When gods brought her drama, she responded with logic, not tears. Even in battle, she didn't scream or rage like Ares. Her shield, the Aegis, wasn't just for blocking attacks. It terrified enemies. Some said it made a roaring sound like 1,000 lions. Others claimed just seeing it would send armies fleeing. It was armor that could attack back. She moved like a chess player 3 moves ahead, never flustered. She didn't just protect people, she protected herself. One weird fact? But underneath that iron will, there was always the question, did Athena need the armor, or was she afraid to take it off? Historians and poets have long pondered this. Was her emotional distance a sign of strength or fear? After all, she was never a child, never held, never comforted. She came into being shouting and swinging. That does something to a person, even a goddess. And if you lived in ancient Athens, you'd see her everywhere, statues towering over the agora, her spear always upright, her face calm but unreadable. People didn't pray to her for cuddles. And you? Maybe you've had a moment like that too. When the world was chaos and your response wasn't to cry, but to plan. Athena would understand. Because for all her might, she didn't win battles by swinging the biggest sword. But that comes with a cost. No one hugs a statue, and the higher the pedestal, the harder it is to rest. Still, Athena's armor wasn't just defense. It was a statement. And in a world that often favors brute force or blind passion, that's radical. So the next time you feel yourself pulling on your own armor, your silence, your sarcasm, your well-timed "I'm fine, remember this, you're in good company." Athena wore hers too. And somehow, in all that metal and myth and mystery, she still changed the world. Let's step away from gods and monsters for a moment and into the dusty corners of real temples. Because while Athena's myth soared across the skies and through the minds of poets, her physical presence was grounded. Literal heavy stone. Tall columns, bronze gleam under the sun. No structure captured that presence more than the Parthenon. You've probably seen the photos. Perfect white marble columns. Strong and symmetrical, perched high on the Acropolis like a queen who knows she's the moment. But those photos are deceptive. They make the Parthenon look clean, almost sterile like a postcard backdrop. And started flexing its muscles as the dominant city-state, the Parthenon wasn't just a tribute to Athena. It was a tribute to Athens itself. Funded partly by shared treasury money from other Greek allies who may or may not have agreed to the expense, it was a way to say, look at us. We've got taste, power, and marble for days. In reality, it was bursting with colors, stories, and weird little surprises. First off, it was a temple, but not just for praying. It was a statement piece, a political billboard, a cultural flex. At one point, it literally held the city's riches. Sacred space meets safe deposit box. No one was robbing it unless they wanted a date with divine vengeance. Designed by Phidias, it was about 38 feet high, made of wood, gold, and ivory. Yes, ivory, citizens, riders, musicians, girls carrying baskets. All part of the Panathenaic procession, the grand festival for Athena we talked about earlier, watching, smiling, blending into the crowd. It was a reminder. This is your city, your goddess, your story. Athens wasn't just ruled by Athena, it embodied her. Even Pericles, the man who pushed for its construction, was criticized for spending too much money on it. Critics muttered, "Do we really need a 38-foot goddess when potholes still exist?" Her skin gleamed like polished bone. Her robe shimmered in gold plates. Every inch was filled with motion, violence, drama. All frozen in marble, mid-action, like someone pressed pause on a myth. She held Nike, the goddess of victory, in one hand and a spear in the other. People who believed that beauty wasn't just about looking good, it was about functioning, standing strong, serving a purpose. Just in case you forgot who you were dealing with symmetry, with wisdom hidden in every carved detail. That blend of awe and intimacy. That strange calm that says you're part of something older and wiser than you know. Built in the mid-5th century BCE, after Athens had driven out the Persians watching, approving, holding a spear in one hand and a calculator in the other. Inside the main chamber stood a statue of Athena so tall it scraped the heavens or at least the ceiling. But one weird detail people often overlook. The measurements bend not by accident but by design to trick the human eye. The Greeks understood optical illusions and used them to make the building look more perfect than perfection itself. The Parthenon's proportions are deliberately off. No, really. The columns lean slightly inward. The steps curve ever so gently. Imagine building something so grand, you have to fake geometry to make it look even better. Historians still debate whether the Parthenon was built purely as a temple or also as a treasury or both. And despite its clean reputation, the temple was a riot of imagery. Along the metopes, those carved panels near the roofline, Athena and the gods fought giants, centaurs, and Amazons. And then there was the frieze, a long band of sculpture that wrapped around the inner walls. It didn't show gods or monsters, but people, and this is where it gets quietly brilliant. The gods weren't above the people, they were among them. But not everyone loved the Parthenon. Some thought it was over the top, a symbol of Athenian arrogance. Still, the Parthenon stood. Through wars, through plunder, through explosions, earthquakes, and amateur restorations. It survived even when empires didn't, and today, if you walk among its ruins, whether in Athens or in museums around the world where its pieces are scattered, you still feel it. And Athena? She's still there. Not in the gold or ivory, not even in the statues, but in the balance, the geometry, the way the stones hold silence. Because that was her genius. She didn't just inspire poets and painters. She inspired engineers, mathematicians, city builders. And maybe that's the real Parthenon legacy. Not just a monument to a goddess, but a blueprint for how to live, with strength. So the next time you see a column, a floor plan, a carefully organized desk, even a grid on your phone screen, know that somewhere in all that balance is Athena, watching, approving, holding a spear in one hand and a calculator in the other. We've seen Athena in war, in wisdom, in weaving contests, and stone temples, but now it is time to talk about the one place even she couldn't to completely conquer, the human heart. Not hers, mind you, Athena's heart stayed zipped up tighter than her bronze breastplate, but yours. And mine, and especially those of the mortals who thought they could handle her approval or worse, her disapproval. Possibly the most frustrating and brilliant man in all of Greek literature. And Athena? She adored him. Not romantically, of course. That's not her style. But intellectually, strategically, she was smitten. Tonight we talk about heroes and what it meant to be one under Athena's watchful eye. He thought, he tricked. He waited, and to Athena that made him worth investing in. Let's start with Odysseus. You remember him. Master of disguise, lover of long walks home. She made him disguise himself. Test people, prove himself. Because to Athena, wisdom wasn't about gifts, it was about growth. He was, after all, the only hero who didn't try to muscle his way through problems. During his 10-year detour after the Trojan War, she helped him again and again, whispering advice, hiding him in mist, occasionally disguising herself as an old sailor or shepherd. She didn't just save his skin, she shaped his journey. Athena doesn't do long-term loyalty to people who start believing their own hype. And yet, she never coddled him. After all that success, he decided to fly Pegasus all the way up to Olympus. Big mistake. She was impressed at first. She just let him try. When Odysseus finally returned to Ithaca, Athena didn't snap her fingers and fix everything. He fell back to earth and wandered aimlessly after that, still alive, but never great again. She helped him here and there, gave him weapons, whispered advice, but you always get the sense she saw him like a school principal views a talented but exhausting student. Or whether these myths were moral training wheels, ways to say, be brilliant but know your limits. Because with Athena, failure wasn't about falling, it was about flying too far without knowing when to stop. At one point in Homer's Odyssey, she basically says, "You're crafty and sneaky, just like me." It's probably the closest thing to a high five the goddess ever gives. Weird fact? Athena literally brags that they're kindred spirits. But not all heroes were so lucky. Take Diomedes. And Athena just grabs him, spins him around, and throws him out of her temple. Left to figure it out on your own, while someone watched quietly, waiting to see what you'd do. That voice that says, "You're capable, but I won't do it for you." No speech, no divine smiting. Just, "You've had enough today, please leave." People who could survive her tests and come out better, not just bloodier. He stabbed Ares, then nicked Aphrodite. Basically walked into a god bar and started a fight with everyone. A fearless warrior in the Iliad, Diomedes once got so hyped up by Athena's divine encouragement that he wounded 2 gods in one day. Athena, but the moment he got too cocky, too self-important, the favor faded. Then there's Bellerophon, a guy who rode Pegasus, defeated the Chimera, and was clearly feeling himself a little too much. Athena, in her usual style, didn't throw lightning. Pegasus, wisely spooked, tossed Bellerophon off somewhere mid-cloud. Historians still debate whether these stories reflect how Athenians saw themselves: smart, bold, occasionally too clever for their own good. Because that was Athena's ideal hero, someone sharp enough to ask questions, brave enough to act, and humble enough to listen. Which brings us to Heracles, a man who was none of those things. Yes, the strong man of myth. Yes, the guy who wrestled lions and cleaned cosmic stables. But Athena? She was only ever mildly impressed. There's even a story where Heracles goes berserk, because in her world, brute force without brains is just noise. Now think about what that says about Athena's own place among the gods. Zeus demanded loyalty. Hera demanded vengeance. Aphrodite demanded admiration. Athena? She demanded improvement. She didn't want worshippers who bowed blindly. She wanted thinkers. Builders, doers. And you? Maybe you've been tested like that too. Given the tools, but not the answers. Nudged forward, but never carried. If so, you've already met Athena and your teacher, your boss, your own internal compass. And it's tough love. It's frustrating, it's lonely, but it makes you a hero in her book. Not because you always win, but because you learn how. Let's talk about something we haven't touched on yet, how Athena handled defeat. Because yes, goddess of wisdom, war, and witty comebacks though she was, there were moments when she didn't get her way. And what she did next. That tells us almost more than all the victories combined. And for this, we need to visit a tiny, dusty island and a very peculiar trial involving a flute. This isn't a metaphor. It's the story of when Athena invented the flute, played it beautifully, and then quit forever because of an unflattering mirror. Yes, really. Here's how it goes. Athena, like any good overachiever, decided to branch out from strategy and warfare into music. She invented the aloes, a kind of double-reeded flute that sounded like bagpipes with ambition. It produced a haunting, powerful melody great for dramatic entrances or emotionally manipulating crowds. She was proud of it. Practiced it. Got pretty good, honestly. Asked what was so funny. But one day, she was playing the aloes in front of the other gods, fully absorbed when someone snickered. And when Athena caught sight of herself in a reflective surface, some say a river, some say a bronze shield, she was horrified. Suddenly looked like she was trying to blow up a balloon while sneezing. Athena stopped mid-note, glared. Turns out it was her face. The aloes, you see, required a lot of cheek puffing, lip flapping, and eye squinting. This goddess who carved marble with her mind. So she threw the aloes away. Just hurled it off a cliff like an embarrassing school recorder. Others say she came to watch, curious to see what had become of her invention. Either way, the story ends terribly for Marsyas. It floated down to Earth, where it was picked up by a satyr named Marsyas. Now, Marsyas wasn't a god. He was just a woodland creature with the unfortunate confidence of someone who believes they may mastered a divine instrument after 20 minutes. He started playing it, and people liked it. So much so that he declared himself better than Apollo, the god of music. Which, let's be clear, is the mythological equivalent of a toddler challenging Beyoncé to a vocal battle. Efficiency, elegance. If something exposed her, made her laughable, emotional, unpredictable, she couldn't stomach it. She wasn't the god of messy genius. She was the god of polished execution. Apollo, never one to let an insult slide, challenged Marsyas to a musical duel. Who judged the contest? You guessed it, Athena. Poseidon sends sea monsters to cities that spell his name wrong. Now, some versions of the story say she didn't actually attend the contest, having washed her hands of the aloes completely. Apollo, clever and vindictive, added singing to his performance. Marsyas, poor satyr, could only play. Apollo won, and then flayed Marsyas alive. Yeah, that escalated. What's important here isn't the gory punishment, it's what happened before. Athena had created something beautiful, but the second it made her look silly human, even she walked away from it. No tantrum, no vengeance, just distance. Or perhaps a quiet nod to Athena's own discomfort with imperfection. Maybe a different kind of music would have filled the temples wilder, stranger, more heartfelt. Because if there's one thing Athena hated, it was vulnerability. Even in her creations, she demanded perfection. We've all stepped off a stage before the second verse. We've all tossed our own aloes in the river, then pretended we never cared in the first place. And maybe she hummed it once in a while when no one was watching. Ghosted the hobby, vanished from the venue, and that's what separates her from so many others. Most gods in Greek mythology doubled down when embarrassed. Zeus throws lightning. Hera starts multi-generational blood feuds. Athena? She steps back, withdraws, removes herself from the mess. But the story of Marsyas shows what happens when others don't. He found beauty in the very thing Athena rejected. He embraced the silliness, the emotion, the puffed cheeks. And it cost him dearly. Historians still debate what this myth is really about. Is it a warning about hubris? A commentary on how Apollo's refinement crushed raw creativity? Because let's face it, if she kept the aloes, let herself look goofy, embraced the sound, maybe Marsyas wouldn't have died. But that wasn't Athena's way. She didn't lose often, but when she did, she didn't throw fits. She just deleted the app. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Did Athena avoid certain paths not because she couldn't win, but because she couldn't risk looking foolish trying? And if that hits a little too close to home, you're not alone. We've all dropped something we loved the second someone laughed. But maybe, just maybe, Athena did care. Maybe, somewhere deep inside that bronze helmet, she still remembered the tune she played that day, awkward sheiks and all. Because even gods get embarrassed. Even wisdom has blind spots. And even the perfect ones have a drawer full of abandoned flutes. So here we are. The final steps in the long sandals of Athena's journey, a goddess who never needed to shout to be heard, never needed a lover to be complete, and never needed a throne to hold power. But before we dim the lights for good tonight, there's one last corner of her mythos we have to visit. Not a battlefield, not a temple, but a courtroom. Because if there's one part of Athena's story that still echoes through time quietly, powerfully, maybe even right outside your bedroom window, it's her invention of something almost no one thanks her for. The first jury trial. Here's how it happened. A man named Orestes had a problem. A very Greek tragedy kind of problem. His father, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, veteran of the Trojan War, occasional child sacrificer, had been murdered by Orestes' mother, Clytemnestra, in revenge for, well, a long string of family nightmares. So Orestes did what any respectable mythological son would do. He killed his mother. Cue the Furies. These were ancient goddesses older than the Olympians whose job was to punish crimes of blood, especially family blood. He begged, he cried, and finally he landed in Athens, desperate and shaking. They chased Orestes endlessly, their hair full of snakes, their mouths dripping curses. No matter where he went, they were there, screaming for justice. Orestes ran. With a jury. In a place named for Ares but ruled by Athena's calm. Athena, ever the strategist, didn't just smite or pardon him. She said, let's try something new. She created the Areopagus, a court of mortal citizens, chosen to weigh the facts and decide Orestes' fate, not based on rage, not on divine ego, but on argument, logic, and careful judgment. A trial. The speeches flew. Orestes argued remorse. The Furies argued tradition. The jury voted, and the result? The Furies fumed. But rather than banish them, Athena offered them a deal. Was it a story to comfort a growing democracy? A mythic origin for rule of law? Or just another sharp feather in Athena's helmet? The real Areopagus, Athens' rocky court hill, still exists. You can visit it. Climb the steps. Look out over the city and imagine that moment. A man who killed his mother. Leadership. Creating a world where justice doesn't mean destruction, but understanding. A trio of ancient goddesses of rage. And Athena standing between them all saying, let's talk about this. A place in Athens. A new role as protectors of justice, not just vengeance. A transformation, not a defeat. A tie, so Athena cast the deciding vote. She chose mercy. Orestes was spared. It was a moment of balance, a turning point. If so, you've walked Athena's path. Maybe not with a bronze helmet or a shield full of Gorgon eyes, but with choices, with care, with courage that whispers instead of shouting. And it shows exactly why Athena is different. She doesn't destroy the past, she negotiates with it. She doesn't ignore emotion, she contains it, channels it, gives it a seat at the table without letting it flip the table over. Historians still debate whether this myth marks the symbolic rise of reason over revenge. One weird fact, now that's power. Not just brute strength or divine lightning bolts, but mediation. And you? Maybe you've stood in the middle too. Between tradition and change, between anger and empathy, between what feels fair and what feels right. Athena didn't invent peace, but she invented the rules that let it breathe. And while most gods left behind temples or disasters, Athena left behind something more durable, systems, ideas, frameworks for a better society. We don't light fires to worship her anymore, but every time we sit down to deliberate, every time we vote, compromise, or choose dialogue over violence, we carry her forward. The goddess of wisdom, of strategy, of difficult decisions made well. And if that's not divine, I don't know what is. And now the temple is quiet. The echoes of bronze on marble have faded. The war cries have hushed, and the owl on Athena's shoulder has tucked its head under its wing. The stories have been told, not all of them, of course. Because myths are like spider webs. You think you've traced one thread only to realize it's connected to 10 more. But for tonight, this is enough. You've walked with a goddess who never blinked. One who saw the chaos of the world and didn't try to escape it, but to order it. Not through brute force, not through sweetness, but through sharpness. She was never loud, never flashy, never overly fond of praise. And yet she remains etched in stone, whispered in stories, woven into the very ideas we used to build and govern and live together. Athena didn't need followers, she needed thinkers. And maybe that's why you're still here. Because something in her precision felt familiar. Something in her restraint spoke to that quiet, solid core inside you, the part that doesn't need applause to feel valuable, just purpose. The part that keeps thinking even when everything else is falling apart. We've followed her from the battlefields of Troy to the dusty corners of weaving looms. From shattered statues to whispering courtrooms, and now to here, a soft bed, a quiet room. A mind full of stories, some real, some myth, all stitched together like one of Arachne's tapestries, intricate, tangled, too beautiful to fully explain. And maybe, just maybe, you'll carry one thread with you into your dreams, not to fight, not to prove, just to remember. That even the gods weren't perfect, that even the wise make mistakes. And that sometimes all it takes to change the world is a calm voice, a clever plan, and the strength to walk away when everyone else is screaming. So rest now. Let the shield lower. Let the helmet slip off. Let the thoughts untangle and drift, gentle as an owl's flight. Good night, traveler. You did well.